The universe is not what we see, but what we understand. Immanuel Kant. What we call reality is something we live in, touch, feel, and even believe in every moment. But is reality exactly what we see? Or is there something beyond that which our minds are incapable of fully comprehending? Philosophy has long grappled with this question. From Plato and Aristotle to contemporary philosophers, each has attempted to unveil a piece of the mystery of existence and understand the truth as it is. Is this world an absolute, independent reality, or is it merely a reflection of our minds? Imagine, in the darkness of night, you see a shadow on the wall. Is this shadow reality? Or is it simply the result of light reflecting and taking on a new shape? Plato touches on this idea in his allegory of the cave. He suggests that what we perceive as reality might just be shadows cast on the wall of our thoughts and beliefs. But this is only one perspective. The history of philosophy is filled with theories that have each tried to define reality. Some believe that reality exists independently of us, while others argue that the only thing we can trust is our experiences and perceptions. The question of reality has not only captured the attention of philosophers but also scientists, theologians, and even artists. Scientists, with theories such as quantum physics, strive to understand the fundamental structures of the universe. Theologians explore the metaphysical mysteries of creation and the meaning of life. Artists, too, through their creations, attempt to present a new understanding of reality. We try to examine the nature of reality from a philosophical perspective. We will journey from Plato to Descartes, from Hegel to Hawking, from ideal worlds to fundamental particles. The question is, what is reality? And more importantly, can we comprehend it? Now, join me as we delve into this profound question. Let's explore the boundaries of the mind and perception and see if we can shed a beam of light on the darkness of this mystery. Realism. Realism is one of the oldest and yet most influential philosophical views, asserting that reality exists independently of the human mind. In other words, the world exists as it is, regardless of how we perceive it. This view separates concepts like truth and reality from the human mind, attributing to them an independent and external nature. In the world of realism, the universe exists as a neutral and constant collection of phenomena and natural laws, independent of our consciousness and perceptions. This is akin to what Plato proposed in his theory of ideas or forms. For Plato, the material world is merely a shadow of the world of ideas. However, these ideas exist independently of us, and the material world is only a reflection of these ideas. In his allegory of the cave, Plato places humans in a situation where they live in the darkness of a cave and only see the shadows of objects cast on the cave wall. He suggests that most people, like the prisoners in the cave, only pay attention to the shadows and appearances and cannot reach the truth. Only those who escape the cave and look at the outside world will be able to see the truth. However, in the modern era, scientific realism has added to this perspective. In this approach, reality is something that can be scientifically and empirically proven. Within this framework, the natural world exists independently of the human mind, governed by specific laws, and we can discover it through science and research. The theories of physics, such as those of Newton or Einstein, are directly related to this view. In scientific realism, there is a belief that the universe progresses as a complex system, governed by fixed natural laws, and these laws are beyond the human mind. However, this view also faces challenges, particularly in fields such as quantum physics. The observer, i.e., the human, plays a crucial role in determining the outcomes of experiments. Does this mean that reality, as we perceive it, is not independent of us? Or is it that only part of reality is accessible to us? One of the issues raised in this context is the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics, which states that the state of quantum particles remains ambiguous and probabilistic until they are observed. This might lead us to the question of whether the world only exists when we pay attention to it, or whether the truth always exists independently of us, and we merely have a limited understanding of it. Despite its complexities and challenges, realism remains one of the most important and credible views in philosophy. This perspective allows us to accept that the world exists beyond our minds, and that truth is always hidden somewhere outside of us. Idealism. While realism asserts that the world exists independently of us, idealism is the theory that reality is nothing but our mind or consciousness. Simply put, in the idealist view, the world is what we make of it and experience. This idea was strongly emphasized in the 18th century by George Berkeley, who famously stated, "To be is to be perceived." In other words, for him, what exists is only what our mind perceives. Can you imagine something that is unseen or unperceived? For Berkeley, this is what reality is. Something that exists in the mind. He argued that even material objects, which seem to exist independently of us, are actually created only in our minds. However, this view faces challenges. If reality is only what is in our minds, how can we explain that many of our experiences are shared and constant? Does this mean that truth changes from one person to another? Berkeley responds to this question with complex arguments. He believed that even if we are unaware of something, God keeps it in his mind and continuously brings it into existence. Idealism was presented in a different and more complex form in the philosophy of Hegel. Hegel believed that reality is an evolving dialectical process. For him, the world is a constant process in which ideas progress self-consciously through contradiction and synthesis. This process, as Hegel states, is always striving towards self-awareness. For Hegel, truth is not only in the individual minds of humans but also in the collective mind and human history. In Hegel's view, the world has an absolute consciousness that is being realized through history and culture. Ultimately, idealism reminds us of how our mind and consciousness can shape reality. Unlike realism, which is dependent on the external world, idealism teaches us that what we experience as reality might be more a product of the mind and consciousness than it appears to be. Dualism. In contrast to these two views, dualism tells us that reality consists of two completely different elements: mind and matter. This view originates from René Descartes, who in the 17th century wrestled with the important question, what distinguishes the mind from the body? Descartes, the famous French philosopher, argued that the body and the mind are two completely different substances. The body is the material substance that exists in space, while the mind, or soul, is immaterial. For Descartes, these two substances are separate and act independently of one another. Since Descartes introduced this idea, it has deeply influenced Western philosophy. However, dualism also faces its own challenges. One of the most significant of these is the issue of the interaction between the mind and the body. If the mind and body are two separate substances, how is it possible for our thoughts to influence our bodily actions? How can an internal sensation such as pain or pleasure affect our body? Descartes addressed this issue with the theory of the pineal gland, but the question remains, how can two substances, one immaterial and the other material, communicate with each other? In the contemporary world, dualism has been challenged, and theories such as panpsychism, the idea that everything, even matter, possesses consciousness, have emerged. This view attempts to understand the combination of mind and matter as one unified substance. But could this be the final answer to the mind-body problem? The question remains open, and the human mind continues to search for answers. Materialism. Materialism, in contrast to idealism and dualism, is the view that the only thing that exists is matter. This perspective holds that all natural and mental phenomena can be fully explained by physical laws and material properties. In other words, there is nothing beyond matter and energy. Throughout history, many philosophers have extensively developed this view. Particularly in the modern era, scientific materialism has garnered significant attention. This approach suggests that everything we know as experience or consciousness is the result of material processes in the brain. Simply put, the human brain, as a complex system of neurons and electrical signals, generates all of our thoughts, feelings, and mental experiences. One of the most important proponents of this view in the 19th century was Karl Marx, who believed that all human social and historical processes ultimately arise from material and economic characteristics. Through his theory of historical materialism, he demonstrated that changes in economic and social structures lead to changes in human ideas and beliefs. However, in today's world, materialism faces new challenges. One of these challenges is the issue of consciousness. If all mental characteristics of humans can be fully explained by the material activity of the brain, how can we explain that humans possess consciousness and self-awareness? This is a question that even today's greatest scientists and philosophers are still trying to answer. Some believe that this self-awareness could somehow be the product of complex processes in the brain, while others refer to newer theories, such as the theory of complex systems, which suggest that consciousness may be a new feature arising from the complex interaction of different components of the brain. Nevertheless, materialism remains one of the main philosophical views, based on the idea that only matter and physical laws can explain all phenomena in the world. For materialists, the natural world exists independently of the human mind, and it can only be understood through scientific methods. Phenomenology. Phenomenology, as a philosophical approach to studying human experiences, examines how we experience and perceive reality. This view began with the works of Edmund Husserl and was later expanded by great philosophers such as Martin Heidegger and Maurice Merleau-Ponty. Phenomenology seeks to directly and unmediatedly understand human experience of the world. Its goal is to understand how phenomena truly appear to us. In this approach, rather than looking at objects and phenomena from the outside, we strive to examine them from the perspective of our personal, inner experience. Husserl emphasized in Phenomenology that to truly understand reality, we must go beyond our preconceptions and previous beliefs and focus directly on our own experiences. This method is known as the return to the things themselves. For Husserl, we must direct our attention to how phenomena appear in the mind, not to the analyses we perform from the outside. In later philosophies, particularly in Heidegger's and Sartre's works, phenomenology placed even more emphasis on human experience and the nature of existence in the world. For Heidegger, understanding human existence in the world is always connected with lived experience and its interactions with environment and other people. Heidegger believed that it is only through direct engagement with the world that humans can realize the truth of their own existence. Phenomenology has influenced not only philosophy but also psychology, sociology, and art. In art, phenomenology has been used as an important tool for analyzing works of art. This approach has had widespread application in visual arts, theater, and literature, helping artists creatively express their personal and inner experience of reality. Existential phenomenology. Following phenomenology, existential philosophy, particularly in the 20th century, was largely expanded by Jean-Paul Sartre and Martin Heidegger. This specific branch of phenomenology addresses the human experience in relation to the concept of existence and its challenges in the world. For Jean-Paul Sartre, the most important issue in existential philosophy is that humans not only exist but also create their own existence. In other words, Sartre believed that humans are free to make their choices, and no pre-established truth is involuntarily imposed on them. For him, the concept of existence specifically arises from individual human choices, and humans must reconstruct themselves. This view focuses on human freedom and responsibility in an unstable world, especially in situations where humans face crises and fundamental questions about the meaning and purpose of life. In this context, Martin Heidegger, by analyzing being as an experience that continuously changes over time, emphasizes that being does not only refer to physical presence in the world but also to a deeper relationship between humans and their surroundings. A person cannot live separately from their world. The lived experiences of the individual, especially emotions, thoughts, and human relationships, all contribute to determining how we are beings. Existential phenomenology ultimately reminds us that humans are not only in search of meaning but create the meaning of life through their choices and everyday engagement with existence. In this philosophy, humans are more engaged in the complex, tense experience of searching, choosing, and constructing their own identity than in seeking a single truth. Metaphysics of time and space. In metaphysics, the topics of time and space have always been fundamental issues. We typically understand time and space as categories that naturally exist independently of us. However, deeper metaphysical questions arise, such as whether time and space truly exist independently of humans. One of the most significant issues discussed in the history of metaphysics is the relativity of time. Philosophers like Isaac Newton viewed time and space as independent of the human mind, while Albert Einstein, in his theory of relativity, demonstrated that time and space are directly dependent on the movement and acceleration of objects and change relatively depending on speed and motion conditions. In other words, what we perceive as time or distance may be entirely different for an observer moving at very high speeds or in strong gravitational fields. This concept is particularly important for philosophy and metaphysics. If time and space are relative, how can we perceive them as fixed realities? Moreover, does the variability of time and space mean that all our experiences of the world, depending on our specific conditions and position in time and space, are relative? From another perspective, the French philosopher Henri Bergson introduced the concept of lived time, which is primarily related to the human subjective experience and perception of time. Bergson argued that the physical time measured in laboratories is merely a mathematical and computational structure, whereas what we experience as time is deeply connected to the flow of consciousness and human emotions. This lived or internal time is constantly in motion, and according to him, it cannot be accurately measured with scientific tools. This view raises the question of how we can compare individual experiences of time with scientific and philosophical models of time. Can these two perspectives complement each other? Ultimately, this issue remains one of the most challenging topics in metaphysics, and many of its meanings and dimensions will become clearer through the interaction between science and philosophy. Metaphysics of ethics. Another aspect of metaphysics that is discussed in philosophical debates is the metaphysics of ethics. This field examines the nature of good and evil, justice, and other ethical concepts. The central questions in this area are whether ethical concepts can be deduced from the material world and natural laws, or if these concepts exist independently of the material world. In his work The Republic, Plato delved deeply into this issue, believing that ethical concepts such as justice, beauty, and goodness exist independently of the material world and exist as eternal and unchangeable ideas in the ideal world. This view had a significant influence on idealistic philosophies. In contrast, some philosophers like John Stuart Mill and Immanuel Kant believed that ethical principles can be logically and humanely derived. For Kant, ethics is based on rational and universal principles that exist independently of experience and the material world. Ultimately, the metaphysics of ethics raises various challenges regarding the relationship between ethics and material realities. Can we deduce ethical principles from the same laws that explain nature and the physical world? Or are these principles realities independent of the material world? These questions remain a topic of discussion in philosophical circles and may one day be answered through new advancements in science and philosophy. Philosophy of mind and consciousness. One of the most complex and fascinating issues in metaphysics is the problem of mind and consciousness. The question of what consciousness is and how it emerges from the brain's activities has been the focus not only of philosophy but also of neuroscience. Is consciousness simply the result of material processes in the brain, or is there something beyond that? These questions have become fundamental challenges in the philosophy of mind. In ancient times, philosophers like Plato and Aristotle spoke of the mind as something separate from the human body. They believed that the soul or mind operates independently of the body and material things. From this perspective, the mind is seen as a place for thinking, feeling, and understanding, distinct from physical laws. With the advancement of science and philosophy in the modern era, the concept of dualism emerged. René Descartes was one of the most prominent defenders of this view. Descartes argued that the mind and body are two independent substances. The mind, which he referred to as the soul, has no physical properties and is distinct from the body and matter. While the body and brain are subject to physical laws, the mind is not only independent of these laws but can think and decide freely. However, in the 19th and 20th centuries, materialists and neuroscientists began to examine whether consciousness could be fully explained by brain activities and neurons. Philosophers such as Daniel Dennett and David Chalmers have presented various theories in this area. Dennett, a materialist, believes that consciousness is entirely the result of brain activities, with no non-material element in the process. He argues that we can ultimately explain all mental phenomena completely through neuroscience. However, Chalmers has raised a question known as the hard problem. He asks, how can brain activities give rise to mental experiences or qualia? In other words, why do chemical processes in the brain result in specific emotions and experiences? This question has been widely debated in the philosophy of mind and neuroscience, and there is still no definitive answer. Ultimately, the philosophy of mind and consciousness has become one of the central and most complex topics in science and philosophy. Is consciousness the result of brain activities, or is it something more? And how can it be defined and measured? These questions remain challenging and unresolved. Philosophy of science and truth. In the study of metaphysics, one of the key areas is the philosophy of science. This branch of philosophy addresses questions about the nature of science, truth, and scientific methods. What distinguishes science from non-science? Are the truths that science discovers always certain and unchanging, or might they change in the future? One of the most important questions in the philosophy of science is the nature of scientific truth. Many philosophers, such as Karl Popper, Thomas Kuhn, and Imre Lakatos, have addressed the question of whether science can truly achieve absolute truth. Karl Popper, one of the most important philosophers of science, introduced the theory of falsifiability. He argued that a scientific hypothesis is only scientific if it can be tested and, if necessary, refuted. In other words, every science must be falsifiable and should never be considered as an absolute, unchangeable truth. In contrast, Thomas Kuhn introduced the theory of scientific paradigms, stating that science progresses not only through individual experiments but also through major shifts in the ways humans think about and view the world. He believed that science undergoes significant changes over time and that with new advancements, an old theory may be completely discarded. Ultimately, the philosophy of science explores whether scientific truths are real and absolute, or if they are only valid within specific temporal and spatial frameworks. These questions lead to an exploration of the metaphysics of truth and its nature. Metaphysics of reality and simulation theory. In contemporary times, new theories have emerged in metaphysics that explore reality and simulation. One of these theories is the simulation theory, which has been widely proposed by Nick Bostrom. He argues that the probability that we are living in a computer simulation is very high. According to this theory, if humans were ever capable of creating simulations that perfectly replicate human life, the likelihood that we ourselves are living in one of these simulations increases dramatically. Bostrom uses statistics and mathematical logic to propose that the probability of being simulated is so high that it should be taken seriously. The question of whether we are living in the real world or in a computer simulation has become one of the most intriguing and debated topics in metaphysics. In this context, theorists such as Ronald Dahl and physicists like David Deutsch have also examined the philosophical and scientific aspects of this issue, questioning whether we can truly understand the reality we inhabit or whether we are always living in a simulated world. Philosophy of time and change. Time is one of the most complex and ambiguous concepts in metaphysics that has occupied the minds of philosophers for centuries. Our understanding of time is based on our daily experiences, but when we look at this concept from a philosophical angle, new issues arise. Does time exist independently of us, or is it only experienced through changes in the world? Different philosophers have offered various views on the nature of time. Augustine, one of the greatest Christian philosophers, concludes in his works on time that time does not exist, but what we experience as time is actually a collection of memories and anticipations. From his perspective, time only exists in the human mind. In contrast, Einstein, with his theory of relativity, presented the concept of time in an entirely new way. According to this theory, time is a physical reality that is heavily dependent on motion and gravity. In the world of relativity, time is neither fixed nor independent of space, but changes dynamically and is dependent on speed and gravity. Other views, such as future-oriented and present-oriented perspectives, address how time exists in the world and its impact on events. Does time exist only in the present, or do the past and future also exist in a real sense? These discussions show how the concept of time can create new philosophical challenges from different perspectives and lead to a reconsideration of how we think about the world and its transformation. Metaphysics of ethics and values. Alongside issues such as truth, consciousness, and time, another important domain in metaphysics is ethics. Questions such as, are moral values real? Can ethics be explained based on material or natural facts? What is the source of morality? And are ethics dependent on time and place? Have become complex and serious discussions. In this field, moral philosophy generally studies values and ethical principles, including right and wrong, good and bad, as well as moral goals. Some philosophers, like Kant, believe that moral principles are the same for all humans, regardless of time and place, and that they must be followed independent of material or cultural conditions. According to his view, ethics is a set of universal and necessary instructions that must be understood through reason. On the other hand, some philosophers have pointed out relativistic views, such as Robert Sobel, who argue that ethics depends on cultural, social, and historical conditions. In this view, nothing is absolutely moral or immoral. Rather, ethics depends on the context and conditions. These discussions have become central philosophical challenges in the field of ethics and metaphysics. Are moral values real and independent of circumstances, or are they just human-made concepts that change over time? Metaphysical challenges in the modern era. With scientific and technological advancements in the modern era, metaphysical concepts have also faced new challenges. One of the most significant challenges is scientific theories and empirical viewpoints, which have increasingly influenced philosophy. Science is attempting to answer many metaphysical questions through empirical and mathematical methods. On one hand, this approach may solve metaphysical problems, but on the other hand, some of these concepts still require deeper philosophical reflections. For example, quantum physics has introduced complex concepts such as probability, uncertainty, and simultaneity into the scientific world. These issues have led many philosophers to ponder whether scientific explanations can fully answer metaphysical questions or not. Moreover, advancements in artificial intelligence and computer simulations have created new issues in metaphysics. Questions such as, can machines have consciousness? What differentiates humans from machines? And can humans eventually create self-aware machines? Have become fundamental challenges in the modern world. Metaphysics, as one of the fundamental branches of philosophy, has posed deep and complex questions about the nature of the world, reality, time, mind, and consciousness. These questions are not only fascinating for philosophers but also for scientists, psychologists, and even engineers in the contemporary world. Throughout history, various philosophers have offered different perspectives on the nature of truth, change, time, and mind, but many of these questions still remain unanswered. However, metaphysics continues to progress, and with the advent of new scientific developments, the need to address these questions is still felt. Ultimately, metaphysics is not only concerned with understanding reality but also expanding the boundaries of human thought. This thinking helps us not only have a deeper understanding of the world around us but also reconsider traditional beliefs and concepts and contribute to the expansion of human knowledge.